But I would say for us, I mean, we're driving this as far as possible because again, the way that we're using Arcade is just Bitcoin script on steroids. So it has the ability to provide all types of programmability that have been envisioned and people are dreaming about doing on Bitcoin on-chain. But Bitcoin on-chain, because of the latency between blocks and the 10 minutes block times and sort of the lack of space in blocks was always prohibitive. And by moving a lot of the transaction logic off-chain, again, you're able to do things like Bitcoin-backed lending, which are things that we're exploring, depending on multi-sig or DLC implementation, or things that are, perhaps would be called more exotic, but simply leveraging opcodes that are not available on Bitcoin. One of the things I say is generally that, I think over a decade ago now, we've kind of come to the agreement that not every transaction should be enforced by Bitcoin consensus. We know that there's a limit to the amount of transactions that can make it onto Bitcoin. And we think that not every financial operation should be validated by Bitcoin consensus. And by moving some financial operation off-chain and not being necessarily always enforced by Bitcoin, then we have the ability to use more creative logic around those spending conditions and those programs and those contracts. And this is all works in sort of a collaborative way. So as long as everyone kind of like works together to progress the state of those contracts, then everything works fine. But I think the beautiful thing that we found that the idea that ARC kind of introduced, or at least put to the forefront, is that in case where some party in the contract decides to not be collaborative, then you have sort of pre-signed transactions and an exit path on-chain for every participant. So the worst case scenario is that everyone kind of like goes back to their on-chain funds, and ideally nobody loses any money.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go just after that, is what is basically the difference between using ARC for payments or for more programmable apps like lending, like you mentioned, or peer-to-peer swaps. What is the difference between ARC, using, for example, Liquid that we speak a lot in the Bitcoin ecosystem, or just using, for example, Starknet or Ethereum? What makes ARC special?
Is that from a programmability perspective,
or even for the payments? Because technically, also Starknet, for example, bets a lot on Wrap BTC and all these things to make payment. Yeah, also using Lightning.
I think a key difference with Liquid, for instance, is that you can achieve a fully trustless balance in ARC. So after you performed a refresh or a batch in Arcade, you have a fully trustless balance. You have absolute certainty that you can get back on chain if you want to. With Liquid, you're always trusting the Federation. There's no way of escaping that. There are other, let's say, adjacent technologies which have similar trust models. Another thing is ARC, much faster payments. With Liquid, you're still waiting for block generation. I think in terms of an implementation, like if you were deploying an SDK inside your app, an ARC app integration would. I used to work at Blockstream, and I'm pretty sure that an ARC integration is simpler than Liquid, although I'm not an engineer, so yeah, I'd say that there was some of the key difference with Liquid, for example.
Maybe Alex will know more on the conversion with Stocknet and EVM.
Well, I mean, again, the main difference between ARC and most sort of other layers of Bitcoin is that, like I said earlier, ARC is just, it literally is just Bitcoin. So every ARC transaction is a Bitcoin transaction. It uses the same data format, uses the same transaction structure, and so this is why in worst case scenarios, generally speaking, you're able to broadcast. You can use ARC in a sort of optimistic way where every participant works in a collaborative manner to enable all of the use case, whether they're payments or programmability. But because literally every transaction that you're making is a Bitcoin transaction, the only difference is that whether or not it actually makes it on chain or not. But if in the event that you need to actually put it on chain, then you can broadcast it, and it's going to be a valid Bitcoin transaction. Now, there's some caveats to that, and yes, sure, when you're involving more programmability and sort of more elaborate contracts and use cases on top of Arcade or implementation, then you have to sort of plan for these different spending policies, and you have to plan for different transaction types and contract outcomes that certainly are more diversified than just sending money from A to B. And so because of that, you need to anticipate different failure modes, if you can call it this. But as long as you do a great job as sort of putting a framework on that, and the great thing about it is that you're not adding any complexity, you're not adding any sort of new technology to Bitcoin that other sort of like layer 2s are doing with zero knowledge proofs or anything like that. It really is just Bitcoin transactions and taproot trees, and so you're able to kind of pretty pragmatically evaluate the outcome. And it's a voluntary system. So the beautiful thing about this is that it's not prescriptive. You don't have to buy into a certain security model. You can actually tailor the security model around the exact use case that you're trying to achieve. And then regardless of what activity you're performing, like Neil said, the beautiful thing is that eventually if you want to get back to this sort of trustless or trust minimized qualities that on-chain Bitcoin gives you, then you simply settle all of your activity in an arc batch or an arcade batch, and that gives you sort of like the unilateral control over your funds that typically is not achieved on any other sort of interface of Bitcoin other than Lightning and I guess on-chain.
And in Albi Hub, why do you choose to use ARC and not others, or I think you implement different Bitcoin layers. So where does ARC fits here in Albi Hub? Is it just really to avoid the complexity of Lightning, or is there another use case or another thing that you're using?
So yeah, a lot of other wallets have chosen Spark, and I think the UX there is very convenient, and it works for a lot of different applications. For us, particularly, we think self-custody is important. After you've done a refresh, your VTXOs are truly yours. That's one thing, and I have a hope, I would like to see this happen, that multiple Spark operators come into existence, so they're completely isolated services. You can choose the one that you would like to use. I think if we get in the future, then we can have a more decentralized setup. I would like to see the same thing with Arcade. I think there's some plans there as well.
It's like a really important thing for ARCs, in our opinion. We're biased, of course, that the server is also open source. So a lot of these implementations and adjacent technologies, they have the client that's open source, but the server is closed source. And I think for the ecosystem, for builders to have confidence that this thing is going to be around for the long run, you need the server, the full server, open sourced as well. That means that if any ARC server misbehaves or goes offline or whatever, it means that somebody can pick up the pieces to step in. Ideally, there's already some other ARC servers operating, and it means that the ecosystem can migrate to the other operators. But if you have a server that's closed source or parts of it are closed source, it's very difficult for somebody else to fire something up and kind of restore services across all of the different wallet apps. So, that's one thing I would mention.
Yeah, so we have a few minutes left, and maybe to conclude this panel, maybe in the same topic of the decentralization, where do you see ARC fitting in the whole Bitcoin ecosystem? Because you mentioned Spark, that is quite huge since one year or two, where we see it in more and more wallets that are implementing Spark. So isn't Spark also part of the decentralization of this Bitcoin world, or Liquid for some instance?
I think has an ARC or a Spark strategy, the right two. So I think like in the future, every single Bitcoin wallet app will have one of the two integrated. It's just a question of which one's offering the better user experience, which one are offering the better features, the better SDK. I think there's a little bit of a competition for users there. There's definitely some differentiation. You can already see it between Arcade and Second. I think there'll be a fiery competition for a while.
I mean, from my perspective, like, ARC is already, we started, the name of our company is ARC Labs, and we started with the goal of implementing ARC, which was initially kind of a research project. But ARC is becoming simply one sort of like tool in the arcade toolkit. And Arc certainly is important and has qualities that are going to be hard to reproduce. But what I'm excited about is kind of like the emergence of just like more modern infrastructure around for Bitcoin builders. I think we've spent the last 10 years kind of in different ways, in different directions, improving Bitcoin technology, whether it's at like the core protocol level or via different layer 2s or just the wallet clients or libraries or anything like that. But we've come to a point where like finally we're able to kind of like put together and sort of collect all of these new different sets of technologies and create what is hopefully the next generation of applications and products and services on top of Bitcoin, where before that we were operating in kind of like a primitive way, not that this is like a bad thing, but just like, you know, we had to evolve and mature, and you can tell that the Bitcoin ecosystem in general is maturing in all kinds of facets. And I think the technology and Arc was kind of like certainly one of those, I was gonna say spark. It was definitely kind of like something that triggered this renaissance, if you can call it, of Bitcoin tools. And I think it's going to be kind of like part of the toolkit for every major Bitcoin builder in the future.
Okay, then we are at the end. Just I want to say, if you want to learn more about Arc, please check the documentation of Second Arcade. Everything is online. There's a lot to learn. Also, AI can help a lot to learn more about Arc and how to use it. So, thank you guys. Thank you, everyone.
Also, just a
Thank you.
quick mention, at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be running a workshop. Please come along. We're going to be getting hands-on. I'm not going to do too much explanation. We're going to use an Arc wallet, make some Arc transactions, refresh, that kind of thing. 12 o'clock over at the Source Hub.
Thank you.